Hi there, I'm Max, and today I'm going to talk to you about Explain and Playing English questions. Let's start with what Explain and Playing English questions are. In the context of a CS1 course, that might be a small code segment like the function shown here. These segments are given to students, and they're asked to describe it at a high level in natural language. For example, print the larger of two given numbers is a clear high-level explanation of the code shown here. In order to use this in particularly large CS1 courses, we've personally been using an AI autograder that grades them using natural language processing techniques. In our experience with EIPE, student answers aren't always clear-cut and easy to grade. Sometimes they are. Returns the absolute value of x is a clear, high-level, obviously correct description of the function on the left side of the slide here. But what about an answer like makes x positive? This code does not technically make x positive, it returns a copy of x that is guaranteed to be positive. But is this student answer close enough? Does it get the gist of what this code does? Or do we need that higher understanding of returning and returning a copy? Inspired by difficulties like these, we reached out to other EIPE researchers and users of EIPE questions to ask how they go about using them. Specifically, we asked, how should EIPE questions be scored? We also asked, what are the best practices around EIPE questions, such as how should they be used? How should they be presented? What's the best code to use for EIPE questions? To our knowledge, this is the first attempt to begin to synthesize these ideas of best practices from members of the community who use EIPE questions. In the rest of this video, we're going to briefly describe how we collected our data and give some greatest hits from the themes that emerged. We'll also give some recommendations at the end if you want to use EIPE questions right away. We reached out to 19 faculty to request an interview. These faculty were either involved in EIPE research in the past or were involved in CS1 instruction. Of those 19, 11 responded that they'd be available for an interview. Many of our interviewees don't currently use EIPE in their own classrooms because of concerns for the time involved in grading and issues with ensuring consistency among grading staff. Each interview was conducted by a research team member on Zoom. We asked our interviewees not only how they would grade sample answers to EIPE questions, but also what their goals for EIPE questions might be, what kind of rubric they might have for EIPE questions, what's the best kind of code to use for these questions, and other questions getting at the idea of best practices. We turned each interview into a text transcript, and the members of the research team, so Craig, Binglin, and myself, all independently inductively coded the transcripts. We met to discuss what we coded, what we found interesting, and from those discussions and patterns emerged a set of themes that are the focus of the paper. Let me tell you about some key findings from the paper. This is not exhaustive, so check the paper for more. First off, why and how should we use EIPE questions? Many interviewees express that EIPE questions are good for teaching abstraction or getting to higher level reasoning about code. For example, the most powerful idea in computer science is abstraction, and EIPE hits it on the head in a way that's very hard to get to. With respect to the type of assessment, most interviewees thought these would be useful formatively, and one interviewee states formative. But I think my answer to almost any assessment would be questions are more useful in a formative sense. Use EIPE questions formatively as a powerful way to teach abstraction. Many of our interviewees don't currently use them in a summative way due to concerns about scale and issues with grading consistency. Secondly, let's discuss training students to answer EIPE questions. Many interviewees brought up the idea that students need to be explicitly taught how to answer these questions. One interviewee states, I think you just have to put in a lot of training work to make sure that students understand how to answer them in the way that you will grade them as correct. We need to teach our students to give the high-level answers we want, but once we have, we can grade them to that standard. Let's consider our earlier code example. Return the absolute value of x was a perfect high-level description that we should train our students to give, and we should discourage answers like take x, if x is less than 0, return negative x, otherwise return x. We'll next discuss what makes a good EIPE code segment. Frequently in interviews, the idea of common coding patterns or code with a recognizable structure came up as ideal selections for EIPE questions. This is exemplified in the following quote. What makes a good question later, I think, is one where there is a common structure. A structure that you want them to recognize in a lot of different situations, which has a general purpose. There was an interesting tension in the interviews between obfuscating the naming in your EIPE code segments and modeling good style. For example, def f of xy is ideal for hiding the function's purpose. You want students to read the code in the function and abstract the meaning. If you give them good style, return largest, num1, num2, it is evident that this function is going to return the largest of the two numbers, allowing students to guess. However, interviewees were worried that by using obfuscated names, students might pick up bad habits. I'll refer you to the paper to read how this tension can be leveraged in pedagogically productive ways. Let's move on to grading EIPE questions in theory. There were two schools of thought on how to grade questions in theory. Grade student understanding or grade student ability to communicate. The first is exemplified in this quote. It isn't a communication activity as much as it is a personal ability to step away and look at design. It's more that we're grading their understanding of what is happening. That was about half of the respondents. The other half of the respondents fell into this school of thought. I think it has to be communication. You know, I don't think you can read very much into an answer before you fall into that hole where you're just making up what you think they know. However, there were some practical grading concerns that came up frequently in the interviews. For example, small slips were often not punished. Typos, grammatical errors, similar but slightly incorrect words were often ignored. Additionally, there were concerns about the difficulty of EIPE questions. Interviewees expressed that if students particularly struggled on given EIPE questions, they might accept less than perfect answers so as to not punish them for having trouble with difficult content. Additionally, there is a need to train teaching assistants, perhaps even more than the students, to guarantee consistent grading. Finally, there's this awareness of English as a second language concern, particularly when it comes to fair grading. Is a given answer an issue with learning English, or is a given answer missing student understanding? I'll refer you to the paper for more discussion on that idea. Our discussions gave us optimism that a universal grading rubric may be possible for EIPE questions. Particularly, these rubrics would be somewhat based on question-level details, with some agreed upon distance metric from golden answers for partial credit. This idea is exemplified in the following quote. I start with the perfect answer and circle parts of it that I'm looking for. For each question, you decide what are the pieces that are important. We'll leave you to the paper for a larger discussion of this idea, but we're optimistic that if we can decide upon a universal way to handle partial credit off of correct answers, grading these can be standardized. As we wind down, I want to leave you with some takeaways. Here are some best practices we think we've identified that you can use right now in your class for EIPE questions. Summarized, these include: use code segments that allow for concise description and abstraction. Common coding patterns and idioms are an ideal starting point for EIPE. Students need to be trained how to answer EIPE questions, but once you've trained them to your standard, you can grade them at your standard. Even if you do not want to use these questions summatively, they make for great formative class activities. Finally, universal grading standards may be possible, which might mean a robust universal autograder is possible, which means they can be used in large-scale classes more easily. Keep your eyes peeled for more work from us. With that, we've reached the end of the video. Should you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you for your time and have a lovely day.